Hello guys, once again welcome to our YouTube channel Edu Hub, and as you know, this part 2 of Phython for beginners, this last part, so guys stay tuned because our course is continue of this course. So without wasting time, let's get started. Phython for beginners part 2.
So for this section, I want to quickly talk about variables. So in Python, a variable can be defined as a container in which we can place in various kinds of data such as strings, Boolean values, numbers, regardless of how large the data is. This is really helpful because it allows us to manipulate the data and access the data much more efficiently without having to change every instance of the string or number throughout the program. So in this example, we have a string, and if I create more strings just for my example, so we have multiple strings, and you can see that prints out the same string 3 times. So this, let's just say this is a whole program, and in this case we have the same name repeated 3 times. But if you wanted to change this name to, let's say, James, and there was a big program that we needed to go through and make that change, it will take us a lot of time to individually change the name to James, simply because we may have hundreds of lines of code. And this is where a variable becomes very useful, because what we can do is, instead of changing this name every time we want to change the value, we can simply assign our name to a variable. And once we have a name assigned to a variable, we can simply use our variable throughout our code. And then whenever we change our variable, the data in our variable, that change will be reflected throughout the program where that same variable is being used. So this saves us a lot of time of having to change our data over and over again. So in this case, we should see 3 strings with the same name defined in our variable. So let's quickly do that and see what we get. Okay, I seem to have missed out the plus. Let's try that again. So we get James in all 3 of our strings because we changed the instance here, the data in our variable. If we changed it to Michael, we should see that change reflected again. So this is basically an instance where things are made much easier by using a variable as opposed to just changing every single string. And another thing we can do is we can change the value in a variable within our program. So here we've defined our variable as containing the string Francis, but we might want to change this variable's value at a certain point within the program. So what we can do is let's say for the third line, we want the name to equal, let's say Tom, for example. So we'll have Francis, but here we want this to equal Tom. Well, we've defined our variable as Francis up here, but what we can do is above that line where we want to change the variable, we can simply assign the variable a different name. And we run that and see what we get. So as you can see, the first two strings have the name Francis, but the third one has Tom because we defined we changed the variable just above that string. So this is an example of how we can use variables to assign and change values within a string and also within the program. So in this case, our variable isn't confined to this value, but we can change those values throughout the program. So when it comes to using variables in Python, in addition to using strings, we can also use other data types such as numbers and also lists. So in this case, we're going to quickly use a number. As an example, I'm going to have my number 5 and my other number, which would be 7. Then we're going to print. I'm going to do some maths and just add our two variables together. And that should give us the number 12. So, and there we have it, the number 12, because we've added our two variables together, which both contain these numbers. Another interesting thing we can do with variables in Python is that they can contain lists as well. So we're going to make another variable containing not a string, not a number this time, but a list. So we're going to use square brackets, and within our list we're going to put in our values, which are going to be colors. So we have our variable on our list. If we print our variable, we should see our list appear in the terminal, which we can see red, yellow, and blue. And now, what makes this really useful is because we have our list in a variable, we can easily access specific values within our list. And how we do that is, one way to do that is just using the square brackets here after our variable. So when it comes to using list, we have red, which will have an index of 0. We have yellow, which will have an index of 1. And blue, which will have an index of 2. So if we wanted to just print out this value, which is yellow, we will just put our index in our square brackets, and that should give us the color yellow, which we can see. Another way we can access data from within our list is to make more variables that contain specific values that we want. So if we wanted to get the color blue this time, we could just make a variable called blue. Or let me change this to choose blue. And then we're going to go into our variable called color. We can change this to colors. we're going to go into a variable called colors, and then we're going to get the index of 2, which is blue, and then we're going to print this variable choose blue. So we have our variable which is colors, and then we have another variable we made called choose blue, which contains the value within the list in colors with the index of 2, which is blue. So choose blue should give us this value, blue. So we save and we run that and see what we get, and we get the color blue. So this is an example of how we can access data from a list using variables. And this also shows us how easy it is for us to manipulate data, and how using variables makes that process much easier. So another interesting thing that we can do in Python is we can create dictionaries. So dictionary is simply a method of storing data in Python, and we also have the ability to access data from this dictionary using a very simple method. So first of all, I'm going to quickly create the dictionary. I'm going to call it weekdays. And we're going to equals curly braces. And we have to use quotes just to remember. So I'm going to put 1 there. Then we have to use a comma after every line that we use. So I'm just gonna quickly do that. So that's Tuesday. Friday. So this side is where our data is. This is what we want to access, and this is just what we call, basically this is the name of our value. So this can be anything. This can be a number. It doesn't have to be a string, but in this case we're just going to start off using a string. So we can call this whatever we want, but let's just use the prefixes for now, and then Sunday. So that's our dictionary called weekdays, and then now we can easily access our data. One way to do that is to simply put the name of our dictionary and then use square braces and then just get the name, and we should see Monday in our terminal. And we see Monday because we've selected the name here. This is one method to access data, but a better way to do it would be to use the get function. So weekdays.get, and then reference the name of the value we want to retrieve. So we're going to get the same result, but I just think this is a better method to use. So we should get the same data. And like I said, this can be called anything, so we can call this 1. And we still get the same data. If we call Tuesday 2, and put 2 there, we should get Tuesday in our terminal. If we just call the string Friday for Friday, we should see Friday show up. Yep, so this is basically a method of accessing data from our dictionary. Like I said, this name section that names our values doesn't have to be a string. It can be a number as well. But the most important thing is that we're accessing our data here on this side. So this is an example of a dictionary in Python and how we can efficiently access data from each dictionary. So following the previous lecture on dictionaries, I wanted to go a bit further and experiment with our dictionary. So another important thing I just wanted to say was that we can also use, just like we can use strings and numbers in this section to name our values, we can also use other data types in a dictionary. So they don't have to be strings only. We can use numbers, and we can also use Boolean values as well. So let's give Tuesday a number. Let's say 2. Let me just put a space here between. Let's give Wednesday a to-do list. Let's say okay, and then Thursday we can just put a Boolean value of true. And we're just gonna print our data from our dictionary to our terminal and see what we get. And we're gonna grab our Tuesday name. And clearly we can see we get the number 2 because that is what our value is. If we tried Thursday, the THU name, we should get Boolean value of true, which we get here. And if we grab Wednesday, we should get our list. And there we have it. We have our list containing 3 values that we can see here. So this clearly shows us that we can access different data types from a dictionary. So we can access strings, we can access Boolean values, we can access numbers, we can access a list, and I believe we can also access a list with all 3 data types within. So we can have a list with a string, a list with a number, and also a list with a Boolean value. So if we run this again, we should get another list with all three data types within. And there we have it. We have a string, we have a number, and we have a Boolean value of false. So yeah, we can access different data types from a dictionary using Python and using this .get method. And this is particularly why dictionaries are very useful, because they're easy to access data from, and they're also very efficient and straightforward when it comes to the syntax, and also understanding how the whole data manipulation works. So for this section, I'm going to go over if-else statements. So let me just write out an example of that. So for example, we would have, first of all, we need criteria that needs to be either true or false, and depending on whether the criteria is true or false, we're going to run a certain block of code. Otherwise, we do something else, maybe run an alternative block of code. So before that, let's create a variable called is equals true is green equals false. So these are Boolean values, true and false. So we're going to put these variables in our conditional statement. So we're going to say if is blue equals true. In this case, we don't need to put equals true. We can just put the variable like that, and Python will read it as if this variable is true. So if this variable is true, we want to make an indentation so that if this is true, this line or block of code will be executed. And this will only be executed if there is an indentation. So it won't work if we have it like this. We need to indent. So if is blue equals true, which it is, then we want to print yes, the sky is blue. Then if we just test that out, we should get yes, the sky is blue, because this is true. If we change this to false, then we should get a different value. So nothing happens, because this line of code will only be executed if this variable equals true. Another thing we can do is add an else. So if is blue equals true, print out yes, the sky is blue, else print no response. And as you see, we get no response because this is false, not true. So because it's not true, we're defaulting to the else. Another thing we can do in Python is we can use else if multiple times. So we can put if is blue equals true, do this, otherwise do something else, otherwise. So in this case, we're going to use, in Python, we specify it as elif. So if this is true, yes, the sky is blue. If is green equals false, then we want to print no, the sky is not green. So if we test that now, we should get no, the sky is not green. So basically, both these variables are false, and what we're doing here is we're saying if this variable is true, print out yes, the sky is blue. Otherwise, if this is false, print this out instead. So elif can be used multiple times, and if there's no criteria here after the if, we can just use else, so that it defaults to this block of code if this criteria is not true or is not met. So this is a quick example of how to use an if-else statement using Python, and this is pretty much the basics of how to write an if-else statement. So another example we could do is you can set this back to true and then maybe use another variable. True. Then we can probably put if is green equals false. No, the sky is not green. If is red, then print red. Change this back to false. And then as we run this code, hold on, I think this needs to have a colon in front of it. So I'll just put that. And we should get, oops, save that. And we get no, the sky is not green. So in this case, we're only executing this, and it doesn't execute this line, even though it's true. So the elif statement in this case is defaulting to this because we're using this after the if, which is not true. This is false. So is green equals false, as we can see here, which is why we have this value, because we're running this chunk of code. So for this lecture, I'm going to go over how to write a for loop using Python. So in Python, we have the ability to create a loop that can iterate over items within a value, such as letters in a string or simply items in a list. So let's create a for loop. So we put for, we can name a variable whatever we want, but we're going to call it letter in let's say house. So for every letter in house, so in this case, this variable is going to iterate for every single character within this string. And then we're going to print our variable letter. That should give us... So here we can see that each individual letter in the string house has been printed out separately because we've effectively looped over each letter. So let's put a space and see what happens. And if we try that, so you can see even the space we've added in the string, because the space is also a value in a string. So that space has also been printed in our terminal. So another thing we can do is we can use this same for loop to loop over items within a list. So we're going to create a list of random numbers. And as we do that, we should also see those random numbers print out. So there we have it. We have all the values in our list looped in a loop, and each item has been printed. So effectively, we're looping over every item in our list, and then we're printing each iteration to our terminal. So like any other programming language, with Python we have the ability to make comments, and comments are one of those things that really help explain what lines of code are doing. We can use comments as well to communicate to anyone who is going to read through our code in the future so that they can understand what each piece of code does. We can also use comments to give instructions. It could be step-by-step instructions of how to understand how a program works, or simply what each piece of code is doing and what to look out for. So we can just make a comment here that could say something like, this does stuff. And then I'm using a Mac, so I will just need to press Command Shift, and then that turns that piece of text into a comment, as evident by the hash key to the left here and also up here. So like I said, comments are just a really efficient way of documenting your code, explaining what each code is doing, what each line or each function is doing, or simply just giving step-by-step instructions to anyone who may read or encounter your code in the future.